You're live. You're live.
Yep, thank you.
Okay.
I'm waiting for Damien to be ready. Are you ready, Damien? I'll kick us off, and this is Senate Transportation. It is Tuesday, March 11th. We are here to talk about the miscellaneous DMV bill, and Damien Leonard from joint the Ledge Council is here to take us through the bill.
I almost got promoted to joint fiscal.
Well, yeah, no.
It's exciting. All right. Good morning. For the record, I'm Damien Leonard from the Office of Legislative Counsel. You should all have a new draft in front of you that is numbered 5.2. All right. Great. So the things that are highlighted in the draft currently are things that are new or changed. There are still some outstanding issues in there. And so we'll go through those. Definitely some discussion points for the committee that we haven't touched on yet or that we're still thinking about from before the break. So I hope everyone enjoyed the week off and made it to all of your town meetings. Since you guys have several instead of just one or two like your counterparts in the House. Not to throw shade on the House if anyone's listening. But, so anyway, getting into the bill itself, there are some changes in the list of subjects at the beginning. Those are based on language that Senator White had asked the committee to add in that would change. The main change would be to change the term length of licenses and non-driver IDs and privilege cards. But before we get to that, you had asked for some potential fee language so that to cover costs related to replacement registration certificates and other items in here. So in section 5, we get to the first of those. And you'll notice on page 9, line 5, I've added in brackets there next to the generate a replacement registration certificate for no charge. You could put in language fee of $17.50 or a fee of $12.50. As Logan came up with those numbers and can speak to them a little bit more. But those are two different fee options here. The first, if you adopted the first, there would be no change to the discounted fees for folks who are receiving SSDI or SSI. If you adopted the second, that would be tied to a doubling of the proposed reduced fees for the folks on SSDI and SSI. So $20 for a license and $10 for a replacement.
Can you repeat what you just said in lay terms?
Sure.
Right now, they're paying.
Right now, the proposal in the bill is to say $10 for their license and $5 for replacement of a lost license.
Yep.
$10 when you reissue every 4 years.
Yep.
The $12.50 charge for the replacement registration certificate is tied to changing those reduced fees for the licenses to $20 and then $10 for replacement of a lost one. Did I get all that right, Logan? Good. Just making
Logan
sure.
will have the overall cost for those who.
Right.
Okay.
Right. So this is but this is put in there for your consideration. So I know there was some confusion that this generated when I sent out the draft of saying, wait, which fee is it? So these are just options for you to consider. So the next change.
Go ahead.
So you're saying the option is no charge of $17.50 or charge of $12.50.
Those are the three options that are currently being presented.
Okay.
Obviously, you could set it anywhere,
Sure.
but Those are the three that we've come up with at this point. Your next change is on section 8. This is the language related to the fees for operators, licenses. It's on page 11. I'm sorry, section 8 on page 11. Fees for the operators licenses or privilege cards for individuals receiving SSI or SSDI. And you'll see in brackets here, the $20 fee for original issuance and renewals and $10 fee for replacement of a lost or destroyed card.
And that's the suggestion that
Yep, that is one of the suggested fee options. Obviously we don't advocate for any of them, but these are some of the options that Logan came up with.
okay,
And this would be tied to the lower fee for the replacement registration certificate.
okay, and we'll want a reminder of what the fees are now and what that relates to.
Okay.
And okay, let's keep going.
Okay.
23 still nothing. Oh, 20.
Yeah. Zip down. And it occurs to me as I'm doing this, that if you keep this language, we may combine some of these sections with the reduced fees, because I think we've got some overlap that I missed when I was drafting this. I apologize for that. So what this is the language that Senator White requested the committee review. This has been introduced in the House by Representative Hedrick. So section 20 here would provide that all operators licenses would expire at midnight 8 years after the date of issue. So there's a couple important things here. One is the current term is 2 or 4 years, and it's on the date of birth of the license holder, the second or fourth date of birth following issuance of the license. This is saying 8 years after, so it would put everyone on a different calendar schedule. So if you get your license on July 20th, it expires on July 20th, 8 years from then at midnight on that July 20th. That's important because the federal Real ID laws do not allow you to go past 8 years. So in order to stay compliant, you have to stay 8 years. You can go anywhere less. We're clearly within that with 2 and 4 years. And so that's why you can't go to the birthday, because you could potentially end up with 8 years and 15 days and you would no longer be compliant. So that one thing to highlight with that, and the department I'm sure can speak to this, is potentially an administrative challenge as you convert licenses over if you decide to move with that. And so you'll want to hear about what that would potentially look like. The next piece here is B, beginning on line 18 of page 25, would provide that on or before July 1, 2029, an individual holding an operator's license that is currently valid till the individual's second or fourth date of birth could exchange that license for an operator's license that would expire at midnight 8 years after the date on which the original license was issued. And then there are 2 different fees here. $85 if a 2-year operator's license was exchanged, and $62 if a 4-year operator's license was exchanged. And what I did to get to those fees is I looked at the license fees themselves, and then I multiplied them out and figured out a difference here. So those fees could definitely be adjusted. They were just placeholders based on really simple lawyer math, which may not always be the best. So that's just explaining where the fees came from. The rest of the changes there are renumbering. And then in section 21, you'll see a lot of this is not highlighted because I combined it with the current amendments to 23 VSA 603 in the bill. And I've just highlighted where I made changes. A couple of them are just changing the word person to applicant. That's just for consistency in the section. I realized we were using both. And applicant is really more accurate because person, the way that VSA defines it, it includes corporate entities who are unlikely to get an operator's license. And then throughout here, there's actually an instance of individual on page 27. That should be applicant. Apologize for that. And then getting on to page 28, you'll see new language that's added here. There are actually no changes to the law here. This language was included in the House bill to provide examples of the current documents that are used to determine whether an individual, to determine their identity and also to determine if they can prove that they're in the United States legally. So I won't go through all of the documents, but they're listed out there for reference.
This is all existing stuff.
It's all existing statute unchanged that was included for context in the House version. That brings us to,
And basically, just so I get it in my head, the upshot of what we would be doing here is extending out their license to a date certain.
right, so you'd be allowing for folks who renew their license, it would now be extended out instead of opting for either a 2 or a 4 year renewal, you would get an 8-year license. And then for folks whose licenses, say you renewed your license in December, for 4 years, you could decide if this were adopted after it takes effect that you actually want an 8-year license. And so you could exchange that license for an 8-year license. And so that's what this would propose to do, is to allow folks to shift over to that and go over to an 8-year licensing scheme. And then that really the upshot of all of this here is it's shifting over to that. The language that's not highlighted on page 30 is our existing language from the bill where we switched over the word privilege card to non-real ID to reflect that it doesn't meet the federal real ID requirements. And these privilege cards are for individuals who can't prove that they're in the United States legally, whether they can't produce the correct documentation or what.
So just repeat what you just said.
So the unhighlighted language on page 30 is existing language from the bill that was put in to clarify that these licenses have to bear on their face the words non-real ID to show that they don't comply with the federal real ID requirements because we don't have proof that the individual is in the United States legally. So whether that's that they lost their documentation or that they can't produce the required documentation, the statute provides these privilege cards, as we call them, as an option for someone to be licensed to drive in the state, but not meet the federal real ID requirements, which a standard operator's license does.
Go ahead.
So before 2029, you can exchange your 2 or 4 year license for an 8-year license. And then after that, all license will be 8 years. Seems like
Right. So the assumption here is that if this takes effect on July 1, 2025, after that date, you'd be exchanging your license anyway. So you would have already exchanged for an 8-year license at some point in that period. And so it just set the date out 4 years to ensure that it captured everyone. Presumably you will capture everyone anyway, because they have to renew their licenses within that time period.
Okay, that's the first paragraph.
Yeah.
And
Go ahead.
do we know why, and maybe if this was your language, what the goal is?
I'll let the senator
Yeah.
speak to that. Yeah.
Unless you just want to go through the language.
I'd like to go
That's-
through the language. We're
that's fine.
gonna, to accomplish this, we're gonna have to have people in to testify on this. And so, but at this point, we're just
Yeah,
trying
that's
to
fine.
understand the language and get through the bill, and then we're gonna come back to something.
And again, so the language here below the non-real ID provides that it expires at midnight, 8 years after the date of issuance. And then we've added a subsection J that provides that on or before July 1, 2029, an individual holding a privilege card that is valid until the second or fourth date of birth may exchange that card for an 8-year privilege card. And again, same fees as were proposed in the driver's license section or the operator's license section. Section 22 replaces the current 2 and 4 year fees with an 8-year fee of $124, which is just a doubling of the current 4-year fee. And then it does leave a 2-year fee for licensing a junior operator, because presumably you will age out of the junior operator status. So that leaves a 2-year period for junior operators. And then there are discounted fees proposed for individuals whose household income is less than 150% of the federal poverty level. It would be a fee of $0. And for individuals whose income is less than 200% of the federal poverty level, it would be a fee of $62. And then the motorcycle endorsement continues to be $4 per year. So instead of paying $16 for your current 4-year license, you would be paying $32 for an 8-year license. And again, if you are below those thresholds of 150% on the federal poverty level, that endorsement would be free. 200%, the endorsement would be cut in half to $2 per year. So, and this again carries over directly from the House bill. And then section 23, which begins at the very bottom of page 32 and goes on to page 33, does the same thing for non-driver identification cards, with the exception that it does not change the fee. So the 4-year fee of $29 remains for now an 8-year non-driver ID card. So obviously, if this language goes forward, Logan will need to do some work to figure out what this would cost the state, because there will likely be a reduction in revenue.
Yep.
Unless you change those numbers. And then again, the same language for non-driver IDs, allowing an individual before July 1, 2029 to exchange their card for an 8-year driver's non-driver ID. And the rest of the language here relates to non-real ID compliant ID cards that are non-driver IDs. And that was left in the House. You'll notice there are actually no changes. This was again left in for context. So this could that unchanged language in both cases could come out. Since the request was to put in the House language, I did that verbatim. But if you want to shorten the bill up, you can take that language out. So section 24, I added this language because it's in the House bill. I am not sure if this was something that Senator White wanted included or was asking the committee to include for its consideration or not. So if it was not, I apologize.
This is page 33.
This is page 35, section 24. It states that the intent of the General Assembly is that individuals be able to obtain a license, privilege card, or non-driver ID that accurately reflects their full legal name, including multiple first or last names or names that contain special characters, and that unhoused individuals and individuals without a permanent residence be able to obtain an operator's license, privilege card, or non-driver ID, and then requires a report back to this committee and your House counterparts regarding the department's ability to issue licenses and IDs that reflect the full legal name of the holder, technological, practical, or legal impediments that may prevent them from doing so, measures necessary to address any impediments identified, and then legal and practical issues that prevent or limit the department's ability to issue licenses or IDs to individuals who are unhoused or lack permanent residence, a proposed process to enable them to actually issue those IDs if they are prevented from doing so currently, and then any legislative action necessary to do that. And then 25 requires the department to develop and implement a public education and outreach campaign to inform the Vermont residents about rights to obtain a license, privilege card, or non-driver ID, the ability to obtain one that expires 8 years after the date of issue, an individual's right to self-attest with respect to the gender marker on their license, privilege card, or non-driver ID, and reduced fees and waivers that are available. And the outreach campaign shall include printed materials and public service announcements on television, radio, internet, and social media. And they shall be in both English and Spanish, with printed materials also being in the next 8 most commonly spoken languages in Vermont.
Yeah, I did want that in there. And this is a slightly different take on what I
Why
had.
don't we just,
okay.
hang on. Why don't we go back to the beginning of this?
Sorry.
We're gonna have you explain, what the intent and what your goal was in this.
You want to do that now?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. From the way beginning. Oh, okay.
No, from the beginning of this whole section.
Oh, just this section.
No, all of this, all of.
Driver's license.
Oh,
Yes.
okay.
20.
Yeah.
Okay, because I thought you had said you did. Sorry. So the reason I want, well, I'll just start by saying, Troy Hedrick introduced this as a bill over on the House side. So this isn't language that I drafted. It was a bill that I was very interested in. And since we have the DMV miscellaneous bill, it's totally germane to that topic. And I spoke with DMV about it, and I'm intrigued to hear their response. But the point of the bill is twofold. The first is that we have a federal administration, Donald Trump as president, who has made it very clear that he is hostile to folks who are gender nonconforming. Ideally, he has, not ideally, I mean, he has, it's almost hard to speak about the way that he has treated trans people and people who have a different gender than the one that they were assigned at birth. And there are individuals in all of our communities who are scared. And we have already seen that passports, people are having to take out passports. Oh, and we have someone who is a lawyer, Jill, who's I'd love to invite at another point to speak on this issue. We're talking about the DMV miscellaneous bill sections now. So trans folks are already being told that they need to get passports with their assigned at birth gender markers. So that is not only denying them dignity, that's also denying them accurate identification. And that is a federal policy. So we as a state have an opportunity, because we have worked really hard to make sure that people have proper identification that reflects their gender. That's something I'm so proud of our DMV for doing. And we are in a position where we could extend the renewal period for folks so that they're not caught up in the federal changes if we have them imposed upon us. So that's the first point I want to make, is it protects trans folks, particularly those who are in very hostile, concerning situations right now where they don't necessarily have identification that matches how they present or how they would like to be presented. So that's the first group. Then there's a whole nother group of folks who do not have proper documentation in the eyes of the federal government. And we would like to also extend that. These are members of our community. These are workers. These are people trying to get from point A to point B. And to not have prior identification is a total barrier to access to anything. It means that you feel unsafe leaving your home. It means that you feel unsafe going by law enforcement. There's lots of things that happen if you don't have proper identification, whether or not you have documentation that the federal government deems to be up to snuff. And
Is
this,
that the case now? They can get a privilege card, so it's changed.
we're just extending the
Oh,
time.
just the 8 years.
We're just extending the renewal. You can get that now. So we are making it so you have a longer window of time that you can use that and not have to renew, because we don't know over the next 4 years what kind of federal reach we're going to have to experience. So having people who have ID for as long as possible that's relevant and valid is very important. And then the last thing, which I really appreciate Damien you flagging, because I hadn't brought it up before, but the language also looks at how do we support unhoused folks and their access to documentation? Because if you do not have an address, you are basically blocked from getting most services. You have to have an ID to sign up for a lot of programs. And that barrier, I've heard from folks who are unhoused in my community who lose access, whether it's through a domestic violence situation, through being evicted, where their address is no longer valid. So to have an extension, but to have the ability to research that, figure out how we can support this community, will just allow them to access the services and that get back on that ladder of being able to participate in community, because not having an ID is such a barrier. I mean, if you think about any job application you fill out, what are the first pieces of identification they ask you for? It's your driver's license. It's a photo of your ID. So if you don't have that, you are basically blocked from accessing programs. So this is very important language to me. And I know that the DMV may have some administrative issues, but I think values wise, Vermonters are on board with protecting trans folks, supporting folks who are underdocumented, and helping those who are unhoused get out of situations that are dangerous for them. So there you go. Those would be my points. And there's a whole list of people. If we want to invite, I can get you a long day of, we could do a public hearing if we wanted to. We could really fill the room with people who are in favor of this. So.
In the 8 years, so it's all around the privilege card and the gender markers is the reason for the 8 years, or is there another reason for the 8 years just for the regular license? Not that so that the other ones are irregular, but you know what I mean? Like, is there another reason to switch to 8 years, or is it?
Like for everybody?
Yeah, because everybody will now get an 8-year license.
I mean,
or is it mainly about protecting?
I would say it's a benefit for anyone to not have to renew all the time. Like, and you can, until the federal standard is 8 years, I believe, before it's no longer considered valid.
We're just getting up to that.
Yeah, so we're going as far as we can. So I'd say if you weren't someone in a protected class of people who is being targeted by the Trump administration, an authoritarian government structure, you would also benefit because you don't have to renew at the DMV as frequently. So it's a benefit to all of us. But my main reason is that. But yeah, I'm excited to not have to renew every 4 years.
So let's continue on and get through the bill, and I think clearly we're going to have to come back.
Do you feel that you're supportive of maintaining the language of the bill at this point?
I really am trying to understand that, and I think it's only fair for the committee to be able to understand this and understand what the ramifications are of this. And we'll get DMV in the chair, and then we'll listen to some people about this. I don't want to take any position on this before I hear testimony on this.
But you're not going to take it out of the bill at this point. We're going to keep it.
Actually, at this point, what I would characterize is this committee hasn't voted on this. This is your proposal for us to consider whether or not we would put it in the bill.
Okay, I think that that's my question because it is in the bill. So should I?
it's being presented as a draft. This committee has never voted on this. Most of the sections of this bill we've gone through and we've approved now. And what we're doing is we're going through the bill and looking at the sections that haven't been approved by this committee. So the committee will have to, a majority of this committee will have to agree and will add things. But what's highlighted in this is, from my point of view, none of this that's highlighted is in the bill yet, because we haven't decided and voted in a positive manner on anything. So, but it's certainly before us to consider.
Okay.
Okay.
So the next item in the bill is on page 55. And this is still a placeholder for the tinted windows language. And I realized as I got to this that I forgot to send the language out. So I have a side by side. I did just send it to Megan, but that was literally 30 seconds ago. So
It is posted and I'm grabbing copies.
yeah,
When they're ready.
so I'll just put it up on the screen and show you the
Up on the
language.
screen. Does this reflect the suggestion that we got in testimony, the 70%?
Yes.
And,
So let me, that is incredibly small for you. So let me just zoom in.
I can almost see it though,
Almost.
if it's far enough away.
All right, let's go 200%. And I'm gonna pull it over here. So what this would do, and I haven't shown all the strike through that would go on here just for simplicity, but this would take what was in last year's bill, which required that if the object is shading or tinting material and the light transmission of the shading or tinting material is not less than the level required under 49 CFR 571.205 as amended. And this would take that and just change it to if the visible light transmission is not less, that should say than 70%. So visible light transmission is the light that comes through. And so this would match up to the SAE standard. In the future, if that standard were revised, we would need to revise it. The standard is a 1996 standard though. So it has been almost 30 years old now. So I don't know that this is going to be revised significantly anytime soon, but obviously we would have to revisit this if that standard were revised to a more restrictive, say, visible light transmission has to be at least 80%. If it went the other way, the state would be fine. So,
Okay.
all right. So, and then, let's see. Going forward, you're going to see those section numbers highlighted. That's just because I had to renumber things, and I do that for the editors so that they know that I've actually gone through my section numbers. And so the only other changes are in the effective dates. Yeah, it's just so that they don't have to pull their hair out.
Still have the issue to consider of license plates.
Yes, so that was,
And then in the there is the issue of the study committee that we're going to hear from the commission on, and there were some members of the committee that would question the people that were on that committee. So we'll want that highlighted in this draft also.
yeah, I just, as I mentioned at the beginning, the highlighting was just the new language and that was mostly for the editor's benefit.
But
there is also the do we have closure on the foster children language? Yeah,
We're,
are we still waiting for that? We have a placeholder in there.
Well, I think we need to highlight that language
Mhm.
also, but I think if, well, Megan's gone. Megan, did we get somebody from, children and families that was gonna, speak to
Yeah.
the foster
We're
children?
online.
And they're online where, hopefully we can take, after we hear from them, we can take care of that.
Okay. So, what I can do with the next draft is I'll highlight everything that's still outstanding and any changes that we've made since today.
Okay, that's perfect.
Yeah. Great.
what section is that, Foster?
The foster care placeholder, it literally just says placeholder for,
It's 41 in total.
36. It's on page 51.
Hey.
There's placeholder for possible language regarding
Okay.
registration for individuals in foster care.
Okay, are you here all morning or are you?
I am. I'm with you until noon, so I can jump into the seat behind you and let the other witnesses.
Okay.
talk. Thank you.
Okay,
Are you ready for the witness review?
yeah, let's get that taken care of. And then we will switch to the commissioner. Well, actually, I think it would probably be good if we switched and had you talk about the cost of each of those fees before the commissioners.
Are you folks ready for me to jump in here?
Yes, Amanda. If
All
you
right,
could
great. Thank you
state
so
your
much.
name.
Glad to be with you here this morning. For the record, my name is Amanda Churchill Kipp. I'm a policy and practice specialist in the Adolescent Services Unit with the DCF Family Services Division. I have a few quick slides to share with you about the who, what, and how many we're talking about related to foster youth and DMV costs. And I'm glad to answer any questions you may have along the way or following. I am just gonna pull up some slides real quick. All right, I'd like to start by providing some basic information for you about adolescent services at DCF and the population that we are serving. There are currently 198 youth ages 15 and up in foster care in Vermont. These youth have been in DCF custody for an average of 27 months. They live in foster homes, group homes with their parents independently and all over Vermont and also out of state. These youth will be adopted, return home, or become independent at age 18. DCF has a statewide contract that provides transition and aftercare services for foster youth. This program is known as the Youth Development Program, or YDP. YDP case managers provide a high level of individual support to youth around their transition to adulthood goals, which frequently include obtaining their IDs and driving credentials. I've included some YDP outcome data here as an FYI to give you a sense of how foster youth in Vermont are doing generally. YDP does have a flexible funding budget that they can use for this population, and they do provide considerable support for youth transportation needs, especially for driver's ed, car insurance, and vehicle maintenance. DCF is required by federal law and state policy to assist all youth in custody to obtain identity documents and driver's licenses. YDP provides considerable support to us in this work, and it remains a challenging administrative task for a number of reasons. To that end, DCF has been partnering with the DMV this year to identify ways for this population to more easily obtain their identification, permits, and licenses. A statutory change that would waive ID, permit, and license costs for youth who are or were in foster care would be supportive to this process. We anticipate, or we estimate that this would apply to about 150 youth and cost less than $15,000 annually. If a cost waiver approach through statutory change is not possible or preferable, we will continue to work with the DMV to pursue an MOU that could include deferment of costs for this population and batch billing. For DCF, the overall cost of identification, permits, and licenses for foster youth is small, yet meaningful. That said, the administrative burden of processing funds for this is high. Specifically, there are 8 separate activities in this process for DCF and our contractors that require correspondence, paperwork, tracking, and exchange of funds, all for relatively small fees. If our staff were relieved of some of these administrative duties, we anticipate increased case management administrative capacity that could support additional young people in more meaningful ways. Lastly, although I know you folks are aware based on community discussion just had this morning, I do want to reiterate the critical nature for all people, especially those transitioning to adulthood, for basic identification in order to access employment, education, housing, banking, credit, and to generally take steps toward living independently, safely and legally. And of course, having access to independent transportation, particularly in our rural state, significantly improves education and employment outcomes. Currently, only 37% of YDP youth over age 16 have a driver's license. We expect if these costs were waived, it would improve outcomes for young people and provide additional support to those who experience state custody. This final slide includes some additional resources related to this topic for your information. All right, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for your succinct and meaty presentation. I have a couple of questions. On the 3rd page, you said 64% are in school. What amount should be in school?
I really like that outcome measure around in school or employed. That's 87% for youth in Vermont who are accessing the youth development program, because that really tells us how many youth are disconnected from those kinds of activities. So that doesn't quite answer your question. I do have I could get some more information for you about how Vermont foster youth compare to other Vermont youth or other foster youth in other states, if that would be helpful.
It's just an important metric for us to know, I think. So my other question just has more to do with what the topic is. Do the kids generally have access to driver's education?
That's a great question. It's very challenging. There are not enough opportunities for youth to access driver's ed through their high schools, often because youth may be in like alternative school settings where that's not an option, or youth in foster care may be on the older side for their grade, so they may miss that opportunity at the right time in their high school experience. There are a number of private driver's education providers around the state, and we would love to see more.
All right, well, I would be interested and I would support making it easier for these kids to have driver's ed. I think it's really important that they drive safely and to their future. It's critical, because you can also have one issue lead to another one. But I would support that.
Here's what I would say. I don't disagree with you that that's a separate issue from
Okay,
the one
okay.
in front of us.
Yeah.
We've got a DMV bill that we have to get out by Friday.
Okay,
And, and I think it's one step at a time.
okay,
And, I think there's a lot of support for the idea of making sure the license doesn't get paid.
Yes.
And I'm getting in
Yes.
front of
No, no, you're
where the committee might be,
okay.
but,
I was just gonna say that there is a program to help them, so we don't need to talk about it.
Yeah.
Okay, okay, great.
and we can,
That's, I'm good.
there's, yes, and, but a lot of kids have trouble getting into driver's ed programs, so.
Right,
That's,
we already have.
that's another
Yeah.
whole issue,
Okay,
okay? I think, Amanda, thank you for coming in, and we, will be working on the language, in this.
Thank you
Thank-
so much. I appreciate you folks listening this morning, and please reach out if you have any questions at all.
Okay,
Take good care.
do you wanna, you go back to the numbers?
Okay, for the record, Logan Newberry with the Joint Fiscal Office, here to present for the changes that were made. This is draft 4.1, so it doesn't reflect some of the changes that were made in this latest draft that Damien just presented, mainly the Senator White's proposal that she added in there, but this does include on the back of on the second page of the sheet I have here for you, it does include the two sort of additional sections that now have a fiscal impact. Those are section 31 at the bottom there, the foster care exemption, as we just heard from DCF, is less than $15,000 annually. So that is now included in this fiscal note here. So essentially it would just shift the cost from DCF to DMV. It'd be a slight reduction, about less than $15,000. I use $15,000 just on the high end. And then as they just mentioned, there would also eliminate the administrative burden that they face. The next section is section 41. This is your study committee.
I thought we were gonna, Logan, go back to the numbers at the beginning of the bill and go through the suggested changes versus
Yep.
what DMV was. I would like the DMV numbers and
Sure, I can skip right to that. So last time we met, you all had asked that I produce some numbers to take into account revenue, or I guess cost reductions that might come from DMV issuing one plate instead of two license plates every year. And you asked me to come up with some fees for section 5, which is the replacement registration certificate, and section 8, which is the SSI and SSDI, that would essentially make things revenue neutral, so that the money that could be gained from the cost reduction would equal the money that was essentially going to be lost from the fee reduction. Does that make sense?
I think what we talked about, and I think if I paraphrase and you correct me if I'm wrong, Senator Hertz, we totally appreciate the reduction for a section of the population that is stressed economically themselves. So we wanted to give them a break if they electronically filed, but there is a cost to filing electronically, and we wanted to balance between recognizing that not going to zero for this population, but recognizing that there was a cost of the system. But we want them to go electronically, give them a reduction for that. And develop a balance. And I think what we talked about is going someplace in the middle. I think so. Starting from that, because that's where we're going to, with this bill, would give up the most revenue. It would be helpful if you reminded us how much money that in each of these sections we were going to lose by going pretty much to zero.
Yep.
Remind us of that and what your proposal in this, what the cost of that would be and what it would reduce us by.
Sure. So as the bill is currently written, Section 5 would exempt people who get a replacement registration online from the $20 fee that is currently levied for that process. So if they go online, they can just print one off, whereas before they'd have to go to the DMV, pay them $20. That would cost $350,000 annually, with some caveats that we discussed last time. And then the second major section is Section 8, which is the SSI and SSDI fee reduction. And this would reduce the fees for people who receive SSI or SSDI from the current fee, which is $39 for a 2-year card or $62 for a 4-year card. They would now only have to pay $10 per card, and that would be valid for 4 years. And then every 4 years, there'd be a renewal fee of $10. Currently, there's also a replacement fee. So if you lose your license, you have to pay $24. Under this section, those individuals would be able to receive a replacement for $5. So as it's currently written, this is estimated to decrease transportation fund revenues by $395,000.
So this one's 390. 395. In Section 5, the reduction was 350.
Correct.
So we're
So if you want to get to the total, which is currently written, will be a reduction of approximately $790,000. You have those two fees, which are the larger of the two. You have the $29,000 reduction from Section 6, which is exempting state, municipality, and volunteer firefighter organizations from the EV infrastructure fee. About $29,000. You have a couple of sections that are really small de minimis fees. Those are Sections 9.
So why don't we back up to this?
Okay.
Back up to the fees for the SSI population. You make a recommendation in Section 5. You give us options of reducing the fee from 20 to 1750 or 1250. Can you tell us what you base each one of those on?
Yep.
And why?
So 1750 for Section 5, you could reduce the fee. Instead of reducing it the entire 20%, you would only reduce it $2.50. You would leave Section 8 the same. And this, along with the elimination of a front license plate, would come out to be roughly.
I want to take the license plate issue totally separate.
Well, this
talk about
analysis,
just the fees for this and what that would
well, this analysis I run is based off trying to achieve a net neutral bill.
we're going to take this one step at a time. We're going to talk about the fees, and then we're going to get back to this. The committee is going to have a discussion about whether or not the DMV bill does not have to be balanced. At the end of the year, we're going to have present something on the floor that is balanced. The issue really here is about the SSI population. And I think there's a recognition here that for that SSI population, that they are economically stressed themselves. And we want to recognize that stress, but what we're trying to strike as a balance on this issue is the balance between their stress and that there is some cost to the system. So let's do this issue and then we'll work our way into what our overall number is.
May I just,
Yes.
just so that I understand, so in section 8, what's the SSI reduction on its own?
That's what
Currently,
we have.
for driver's license or privilege cards, there isn't a reduction. This proposal would add that reduction.
Right,
So right now they
but so
pay
here you have the 395 total.
Yeah.
What's,
that reduction
yes,
to get that is from $39 for 2-year card or $62 for 4-year card to $10 for 4 years. And then every 4 years they pay a renewal fee of $10.
so that 395,000 is just the SSI? I thought this was all of the reductions.
For section 8, it's the reductions in the price for the initial issuance and for the renewals and for any replacement.
Okay, so that's not including any of these other
No,
things. I know
no.
I'm asking it 20.
No,
but
no,
you wanna make-
that is just for section 8 proposal.
And your proposal would reduce that to 20.
So the numbers that Damien has in the bill are based off of the larger discussion with the removal of the front license plate. I do not have a recommendation outside of that discussion.
So I'm not looking for your recommendations. I'm looking for the pricing out of if we reduce the fee, what's the cost of reducing that fee in section 8?
To $10 as it's
No, we're at the 20. Would that cut?
if you change the reduction to $20 for SSI and for the initial issuance, the renewal, and then $10 for the replacement, that would be $309,000 of revenue lost.
Okay. Go ahead.
You remind me, I think I know what the what SSI actually, like, it's all, but it's a supplemental.
Yeah, it's a supplemental. This
What's
is
who gets the
really
supplemental?
for,
That's just for-
I can,
Okay.
I can get you the, but these are really,
This is like 15,000 a year. Mr. Chair.
so at the 20 and the 10, what I'd like to be able to present to the committee is a reduction, but not all the way. Out of the cost of the license plate. Let's not deal with that. Let's just deal with the SSI population. And we're trying to come up with a number that we feel is fair. And there's some concern here that the reduction at 790,000 is a lot. And going to 0 in 5 is not appropriate. There ought to be some fee there, but not 0. And a reduction off of that. So the proposal in 5, the 17 versus the 1250. Can you explain what the difference is there for us?
Yeah, in the difference in fee loss from, so if you reduced it completely, it'd be the $350,000.
Yeah.
If you reduced it by $2.50 to $17.50, it'd be roughly $43,000. If you reduced it 7.5 to $12.50, it would be a reduction of about $130,000.
Can I ask?
Do we have that anywhere?
So,
Please no. No, I mean, I have it, but this will be, at the end of the day, it's a policy decision for you all. These,
So we would, if we, instead of doing the 20, if we did 1750. It's a $43,000 cost. At 1250, it's 130 versus the 350.
correct. And I will just say, these numbers can be anything. These are based on a different, the 1750 and 1250 are based on a different analysis
Mhm.
I did. These are not a recommendation other than for this other analysis that we're not discussing at this point.
It gives the committee options to talk about here. Thank you.
Yep.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I really appreciate you actually looking at it from a net neutral point. I actually thought we had explicitly asked you to do that, so that's a confusion on my part. I had thought we had explicitly asked you to make that kind of tabulation, so that's a misunderstanding on my part as well. So
I would,
oh,
I just say to you that the license plate issue, I think we clearly talked about whether or not we would do it in this bill or not. We made no decision about the license plates or whether they'd be in or out in this. Because there's a lot of issues around that. So I just want to say that from the very beginning, license plates have not been. The goal of this committee in the end, when we end the year and we get a bill, is we're going to have to be in balance. I don't, from my vantage point, there is no reason, in my view, that we have to be balanced within a DMV bill. So I want to take these issues individually. Sorry.
I know, you love to interrupt, it's okay. I
sorry.
like to finish a thought usually, so I respect that you have a lot to say, so I'm gonna stop talking about it. But I do think we should have a DMV bill that is balanced. That's, I think, a difference of opinion. But I'm not gonna talk any further.
The DMV bill is not a budget.
The DMV bill, in my opinion, should be balanced when it comes out of a committee. That is a difference of opinion that I'm expressing.
Okay. Go ahead.
so just getting back to the replacement registration certificates, the concern I had was that going to zero gives the public and us, the impression that there's no cost. But there is a cost. And it's an annual cost instead of a capital cost, to the division or department, however you allocate it, but there is that cost for the new system. There's also some personnel costs, probably minimal, but I was hoping that we would know what those costs are, so we could at least cover those costs. So, but the 17 and the 1250 don't have
They're
anything
not,
to
but-
do with that. They're just kind of random.
Correct. Well, they're
I mean, they're
Yeah,
random
yeah.
to this. They're
Yes.
not random to
correct.
your other.
But yes, we could work with DMV if they have an estimate of, I don't know that they'd be able to break it out to the cost specific for issuing of a replacement, but maybe there's some number we could come up that would
Yeah.
cover that cost.
Yeah, and that might be a bigger conversation because this is the kind of thing that we should have some sort of standard cost for, like, transactions. That would, I wouldn't want you to have to make a separate calculation for every single thing, because that would be nuts. But there ought to be some sort of basic standard, in my opinion, and that might be in a different committee too.
Well, I think we can ask the commissioner
Okay.
what the cost of the system is.
Right, and then break it down. So, yes, you can even just tell us the monthly charge.
We could go back to the breakdown in section A. And the 20 Do we have a cost for that?
$309,000.
309 versus 395.
Yes, that's correct.
And that would take, instead of dropping 29, that would drop it. Because the present fee is 39.
For the 2-year operator's license.
Yeah.
So it'd be $20 for that, it'd be $20 per 4-year fee. Under the current language, there is essentially no 2-year license anymore. They would pay an original issuance of $20, which right now can either be $62 if you got it for 4 years or $39 if you got it for 2 years. They would pay just $20 if you chose 20 for 4-year card, and then they'd pay a renewal fee after 4 years of $28 too.
Okay. Okay. And then you wanted to speak to us about the license plates again.
Yeah, if you would like, I can speak to. So, as far as this bill's fiscal impact, the language in the license plate section, and I will look to Damien to correct me if I say anything wrong here, doesn't have an explicit fiscal impact in the language. The DMV currently has the ability to do 1 or 2 license plates, and if this language passes, as it's currently written, they will still have that ability to do 1 or 2 license plates. That being said, it's my understanding that it is the DMV's intent to go down to 1 license plate. So while that cost reduction will not be reflected in this bill specifically, it will be reflected and is estimated to have a cost savings of about $480,000 a year. DMV currently purchases around 112,000 pairs of license plates every year at $4.30 a plate. So if they go down to 1, they will theoretically be buying half as many, which will save us roughly $481,600, but roughly $480,000. That being said, as it is currently written, they still have the option which they currently have under current law. So there is no actual fiscal impact associated with that section. That'd be something that happens outside of anything directed in this bill. But something to consider when thinking about costs and revenue.
Questions?
Just easy ones. So, how many plates per year is that?
I was told around 112,000 pairs.
112,000 pairs.
But the DMV, I think, could probably give you, if they have more concrete numbers, that was.
And so that's some of the population, right? Because it's staggered. So what's the total amount of cars registered?
That I don't know.
Okay, so you can fit all that stuff.
The
Okay.
commissioner comes up.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. If we have time for the commissioner.
Morning, Andrew Collier, Commissioner DMV for the record. Chair.
Thank you.
Where would you like to start?
You've heard us ramble on about some of the
As far, I guess we'll start section 5 with the registration fee. We're okay. 1750, I think we'd be fine with, or 1250. There, as the senator mentioned, there is a cost associated with our system monthly. I think the true cost of the $20 was because there was an expensive process to reprint the small special sticker that used to go on the license plate. That being said, there's still a cost associated with having the system and having the privilege of having the lot registration. So we're completely flexible. I just don't think at $20 is holding for what the actual cost will. That's what the actual cost used to be, but we are certainly flexible and open to any amount of change.
So you did hear the concern about the senator. The overall system itself and the working of the system to reflect, do we have an actual cost of per renewal, what the cost of the system would be versus
We do I just want to make sure I'm understanding the right part. For what the whole system costs each month, or for an actual like processing and registration to the system?
Yeah, well, I'm sure that you have the cost, but it's really kind of overhead, right? So it's everything that the system does.
Yeah.
You have a cost for that.
We do. I actually took it out of my folder today, but I can get that back to the committee ASAP.
But then allocating that to your different systems. We don't want it to be, I don't want it to be super complicated, but just have some rationality to the fee is all I was thinking.
I can see how granular we can get to that point. I'm sure we can.
we're not going to get this perfect, but I think what you hear the senator say is some recognition of the overall cost of the system. So people, and we want to recognize that this is a group of people that are economically in distress. And we appreciate that that's what you've done in there, in your overall proposal, but there has to be some recognition that there's a cost.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would also toss out there, because the printing of the registration is kind of all runners, not specific to one economic group. I think even another path would be keeping the 20, but allowing people to print out as many times as they want within their registration timeframe. Kind of like when you go to the Apple store, or you buy it, through the length of that term. And I'm just putting it out there as another option, because I do think on reference section 8, I'd like to see that consistent with the $10 of what we have for the non-driver SSDI, SSI pricing structure instead of going to the 20. So I would like to try to advocate for keeping it at the 10. And we want to be as flexible and understanding that cost pressures there, but also trying to allow Vermonters to have some simplicity in printing out the registration if they lose it, I guess, multiple times. With open windows in summer, they get there every time. Okay. Eight-year licenses. I think that's something we can jump into. We as DMV are in complete support of all communities having access to their licenses, and we realize the federal burden that's happening right now. I don't think right now the trouble we're having is if we implement an 8-year the way it's discussed, we are already in the code freeze for this portion of the development, and they're already testing this portion with the new system. So that'd be in November that applying this. Making a change to the current mainframe, I've been told it's not really feasible. This change would have to happen with the new licensing system. So we don't know what that cost would be, and it would most likely delay that implementation timeline because of that change. Additionally, just flagging out, again, a couple things here. CDL licenses cannot exceed 4 years due to the hazmat portion of it. And fingerprint requirements on CDLs is 5 years. There, just to make sure we're all clear on how the licenses what the playing field is. The federal government issued the president issued executive order for the federal government reference gender, and that is applied so far to passports. We have not been told or seen any rulemaking process that happens or has started yet. Where I'm leading with that is the real ID and enhanced operators licenses are Department of Homeland Security documents. So if that is not a solely Vermont document. So there is a possibility that people who come in with an X and we come in for a new license now for 8 years may still have to come in again to have a valid real or non if that changes at the federal level. And I say that more just as an operational piece. I hope that doesn't happen, but I'm just trying to make sure we're clear on.
So like,
This gives me even more reason to do it, if anything. But can you explain what would happen if I had an ID that was valid in Vermont, that was somehow not valid or considered a real ID by the federal government when I was pulled over? What happens in that instance?
Pulled over.
Let's say I have a tail light out, I have my ID. This situation.
From a law enforcement side, nothing. It's a valid Vermont
Yeah, exactly.
ID.
So then there you go.
I guess I'm just trying to understand. Cause it would still, to be a real ID though, like if you go to TSA, we can't say it's a real ID. And I'm just making sure we're clear on that termination. The non-real ID Vermont license is a Vermont license. We can maintain that structure. Currently, there's nothing in statute that says someone cannot extend their license outside of the current renewal process that's currently set up. I think a more concise avenue to approach this is someone can apply for an exemption to extend their license for another 4 years, which puts you outside of the current presidency. And it allows us to, one, quickly review if a person needs to come in for a new photo or bring in new documents if it's real ID, and then we can quickly issue. Because I think if we all of a sudden move to an 8, I'm not sure the load DMV can handle if a lot of people at once. I think the subset of what we're trying to accomplish might be a better avenue with more of just a policy shift in how we handle for allowing an extension beyond. So for instance, if Andrew Collier has a 4-year license, I'm 2 years into it, and I want to extend another 4 years. Fill out a simple form, get it, send it to the DMV, and we can quickly process. Do I need to come in for my photo, or I need to bring in any documents to verify that I'm still resident here in Vermont? And then we can issue and prorate difference and extend that license for the additional time. That is more as if you want something to quickly operationally happen, I think that is the avenue to go on. Otherwise, we're talking about a significant system enhancement for something that's already built, and that would be November for the rollout.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. That was my question. So you said in November is the rollout?
Yeah, it's a Veterans weekend or day.
So it's November 2026?
Of this year.
November 2025?
Yeah.
So this doesn't we could have the effective dates be, I'm happy to push the effective dates out if that's the difference. Because we have like sections 41 and 42 not going into effect until 2026. So if we made it so that the effective dates were November 15th of 2025, would you be, or whatever the Veterans Day weekend is, would you be amenable to that?
I would have to follow up with him because they still have to build. So that's the effective date now. They don't touch that side of the system because it's in the testing phase. So to make the change would have to be after deployment of it, we have to be after the initial go live.
So how are you making the changes in the other places in the?
So that, because if we're looking at more as I don't want to say one-off, but smaller groups filing for this, we have the ability to go in the system and manipulate it on a small scale, like an individual scale versus trying to develop a whole new framework on a 50-year-old computer system. So we're going in and kind of manipulating the dates on the license and reissuing that license.
Okay, I understand what you're saying. I'm obviously visibly not happy with that because it feels like a great example of, unfortunately, continuing to delay people's access to their IDs if they're in a situation where it's changed at the federal level. So I think what I'm hoping, and I know everyone loved, I'm talking, it's like time to talk. So let me just finish this thought. When we speak about your approaching system change in November, I'm not understanding why, if we pushed out this change to when that system is complete, that the conflicts that you're describing, why those would still occur. So why, could you explain to me, or perhaps follow up with a going into law date that would work for you, that would work for DMV? Because I hear what you're saying, but it's also very concerning for people right now to not have a pathway. So I don't think the process of the exemption is going to go and seek an exemption will be as useful of a pathway for folks who are fearful of government overreach. So I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit to what a appropriate implementation date would be to avoid the conflicts that you described when you have the new system up. You said that in November, you don't think you could do it because you're still testing it and you wouldn't be able to know. So is there someone from your staff that I could connect with that would be able to give me a timeline for that?
We can get you a timeline. I guess what I'm trying to express on that is if we make a significant change to go for November, that pushes. Date you're okay. And I'm just explaining. I'm telling you both sides of the center. I'm not trying to be argumentative on it. It's just if we make a change on that, we are in a testing phase, so they have to redevelop. So we push that date out. And I hear what you're saying if you want to hear what a push out date would be. We can be happy to get that for you. I'm trying to circle back on, you're saying people don't have the access to get the IDs now. We do.
No, I'm not saying that. I'm saying they can't renew it for more than 4 years now, which is what this changes.
And I guess what I was trying to advocate for is instead of waiting until whatever X date this will be, which is past the midpoint, we can do something closer to now, which gets people outside of what this administration.
Let's do both. Do both. Why not do both? Let's see what the issue with both is. Maybe I'm confused. What is the issue with both?
I think, how do we factor so are we saying it's 8 for new starting date? So I guess we're trying to figure out too. So are we saying it's 8 coming in? So at renewal, you now have the option for 8. Or are you saying it's 8 open up for everybody?
In the
right
language. So I'm talking about what we have in section 20. So what is your question? I don't.
So there's 2 different ways of because I think I heard it's 8 at renewal, or is it 8 at,
I think it's renewal. I think it's just for renewal, but I have to look to Damien. I don't think it's for new, it's just for renewal. Or is it for all? I thought it was just for renewal. And I
So-
didn't realize it covered CDL as well, so that's.
Yeah, so the language in here would basically provide that new and renewed operators licenses would expire 8 years from the date of issuance.
Yeah, so your concern is the new, not the renewal? Is that what-
so it's 8, sorry. So it's 8 at the renewal,
Mhm.
so that doesn't, so. I'm trying to put this in 2 separate buckets, so. There is the solving for the concern that's out there, which is now, so the 8 at renewal. Would only affect people that's coming up on renewal
Yeah,
in this current.
and
It also provides that an individual can come in, similar to what you talked about with requesting an extension on their current license, come in for an 8-year. Say they're, 2 years into a 4-year license, come in for an 8-year license so that they don't have to renew in 2 years, which.
it's,
So, yeah, so that is.
thank you. That's why I'm trying like that.
So that is where the issue on a macro scale of where putting that into place now is where the issue is. So I guess I'm just reading the concern that or trying to read the concern of helping these groups of population get to a position of feel more comfortable. And I guess the 8-year, my concern is that if we do an 8-year, and that's where the avenue is, we're talking end of the year. Whereas by doing, and then understanding the context of if amount of people that we'd have to have come in if they need new pictures and stuff, and trying to identify that number just to make sure we are sufficiently understanding that bandwidth of making sure we can support monitors as they come in. I'm guessing at once.
So the 8 years new. Functionally in your system. If we went to 8-year, which is something that we haven't done. Your IT system, you're in some sort of development right now, and you would have to move to a change. If I could have some sort of a timeline or a chart that says to me, here's what would happen and when it would happen if we went to 8 years. And the functional issues to that would be helpful to me versus presently you can extend it for 4.
Yeah.
But that is not a change. It doesn't require any change to your system.
Correct. It would be just a more hands-on process with our team, but yeah, we could handle. I say more as an individual, like one-off basis, but more of a, yeah.
People come in now for 2 and 4 year
Yeah.
changes, and what you are suggesting is just have them go to a 4-year and take the 2 out.
It would, we would just prorate. So if I have 2 left on my license now, I'm getting an extension for another 4. And that way, on top of that 2. So now you're at 6. That way we can verify if we need to have that person come in for photo or update any paperwork, if they have a real or enhanced ID. And I say more as a one-off basis, but as a smaller subset, that it'd be more hands-on process, but we'd be able to get that turned out. And that could, because there's nothing in statute now that says we can't do an extension or renewal outside of what current DMV policy has been, which is around someone's birthday.
Okay, wait.
So, yeah.
So just so I'm understanding, in the situation, any Vermonter, regardless of identity, can come to you and say, I actually do want an 8-year extension. or I want a 6-year extension, or I want more than a 4-year extension, and you can give special exemption?
No, it'd be a 4-year. Yeah, it's
Just
utilizing the 4, but it's adding it to your, whatever difference you have on your.
Okay, and your pitch is basically Trump ideally will not be in office at that point, so you don't need to worry about it. It's kind of your pitch. That's
Yeah.
where you get outside of this term to answer that concern. That's what you're
Yes.
saying. Okay, that still doesn't answer the concern for me though. Because I don't necessarily think that we are, I still think that the waters are murky enough that we should have as long of a period of time that idea is relevant. So I hear what you're saying. I mean, yeah, he's already talking about third term. So, you know, I'd like as long as possible for folks to be able to have the dignity of their identity still being in place in Vermont. You know what I'm saying? So, and I understand that's an administrative challenge, but this is like our moment. Do you get what I'm saying? Like, this is our moment to stand up for people who are in very difficult situations and to row in the same direction. And I really hope that we can put the administrative weight to support that in any situation we can, even if it's small. And so I guess that's what I'm asking for. And I understand what you're saying because you're the administrator of it, but it is extremely frustrating, I think, for these communities of people right now to continue to be told that it's too much work for us to make a special arrangement for you. So I really do hope that we, yeah, I mean, I went home to town meeting week and I had people who were hysterical. You know what I'm saying? Like hysterical, because they were told that their passport was no longer, they couldn't renew their passport. And so to not have access to an ID, to at least be given the ability to extend it 8 years. I understand that that could be administratively complex, but it is meaningful. And sometimes we need to do meaningful things, even when it's administratively complex. So I hope that we can collectively choose to move forward on this. And I feel passionately about it, so I apologize if that bleeds over, but it really matters to people.
Andy?
I think one of the points that Commissioner was trying to make is that the Vermont ID won't change. I mean, unless we decide.
Yeah.
Well, they would always have the ability to have gender marker of their choice
No,
with the state license.
no, but you said that's not true because the
No,
federal government.
I said the non-real ID is a Vermont
Yeah,
license, so that will never change.
yeah, but the real ID could, which is.
Right, but it could anyway, because it's a federal,
It's
right, we can't affect the federal regulation. So we could say if you have an 8-year real ID, but then next year they can say that's not valid because of X, Y reason, because it's the federal rule. We can't affect the federal rule. We can only affect the Vermont rule. So it can always have that gender mark regardless if it's 8 years or 4 years.
We know that for sure.
That's my understanding right
We know
now.
that for
But
sure. The federal government can't change that.
I mean, they can
Federal
try.
government can change it.
They can change the real ID. They can't change what a
They
state,
can't change what the state can do.
right. So I mean,
Well,
they might try.
Well, that's what
Well,
I'm
that's what-
concerned about. Yeah.
The Vermont,
Here's my, in my question, other questions, if we, the real ID piece, we can't change. If we try to change the real ID, then the license that we have, that I can go on a plane, or I can go to Canada with, or that we put at risk everybody's.
Sure, that's Vermont. We all will be affected if a minority of people are targeted. Like, that's our people. You know what I'm saying? Like, we should all, like, I don't care if my ID is affected because a person who can't have their gender identity recognized. Like, we all need to be in this together.
so,
Go ahead.
so what I heard was people with whatever time they have left on their license. So say they have 3 years left and they can come back and get 4 more years. Is that?
that's what I'm advocating. That's what I'm
Or,
advocating.
and would that take legislative change?
So I think that is just a department policy change, because there's nothing in statute that would, that shows that renewal has to be, what we currently have is 60 days or something around your birthday as a
Yeah,
renewal date.
but just as a person, I would just expect that it would be a new 4 years. I wouldn't expect that the remaining time on my license would be added to it. So that is a benefit. And one thing we could do is heavily advertise that to folks and say, you can extend your license. I mean, there's gonna be other people who are worried about this too. You can extend your license for another 4 years. And just market that heavily, and that would be supportive of folks.
Yeah, I hope.
And we could do that sooner than we could do the other thing, the 8-year thing.
Yeah, I'll take whatever.
So, and we need to move on from this. I think we, get the issues here in, you know, I think there's sympathy for doing, something in this area, and we'll work on it. We've got identification cards, pieces, and then, the report. You can comment on the rest of this.
Yep, you want, that one be DCF, correct?
Can you talk about, he didn't address the unhoused folks.
I'm sorry, that was, I
Exactly
did,
what I
oh,
mean.
my apologies, I didn't find that one. So this is a group, we currently, our director of operations works directly with the shelters to, and other organizations. And we do work to get people that are unhoused identification cards. So that's something we have been doing. We have a great report. It is a, because these are adults, it's easier to, they know their social security number, for the most part, or other identifying areas. So we're able to move quickly on those and get those processed. So that is an area we currently work in, and this would be supplementing what we already currently do.
great.
Or not supplementing, but it'd be what we already do.
So you're supportive of that.
Yeah, we already do. This is what we already do.
So if I don't have an address,
And I can ask how we handle that, but Nancy Prescott, our director, she works with all these groups all the time on a, as a director person works on 101, and we get these processed all the time.
that's great. So what would you, okay.
So I don't, so maybe I guess I'm not understanding. I don't think there's a legislative change that needs to happen. This is something we currently operate in and work to make sure we get.
Yeah, I'd say anecdotally, I do think there are some gaps that I've heard from folks. So I would love to understand more about what your program is. And maybe we can invite Nancy to come and speak to us about what it is, because I would love to know, what is the address that folks use? Like if they're staying at the Haven and it's a short-term stay, what's the address that they're able to use for that identification, and what's the process?
Sounds good.
And it
Yeah.
sounds like Nancy would know.
Yeah, that's just a question I had written down. How do you, in the operator only license, part of that, how do you revoke and reinstate licenses for unhoused with no address?
Maybe default to deputy commissioner over there.
Deputy Commissioner, TNV members of, they provide us with the address they're living at, where they're staying at, or working. So if it was the Haven, we would use the Haven's address. Any mailings would go to the last known address on file, which would be the Haven, wherever they're staying.
Can I ask another follow?
Sure.
Do you have a history as your success in following through? I mean, how many people actually get that information, or get the suspension or the reinstatement?
I don't know for sure. All the mailings would go to the Haven or whatever shelter they're staying at, and then they would disperse them. So if they're still in contact with that person, they'd be able to get it to them, or if they're still staying there.
So Groundworks does too.
Yeah, I'd love to, Mr. Chair, if we could ask Nancy to come testify, or whoever's the purveyor of that program, at least written testimony, it would be helpful to understand, because I've certainly heard from folks who are living in their vehicles, they might not be associated with a shelter, who have had a really hard time accessing licensure. And usually if you're living in your vehicle, you really want to
Those specifics.
And Section 24, 25.
So, 24, I get it, if we're just looking for 4, these are all data points we, just verify that we have. Again, as far as legislative action outside of the section with the unhoused, which we currently do, if we're just talking 8 here, that would just I think that's we have some points to come back to committee with as far as implementation timeline and in that piece currently right now. And then as far as section 25, we are always happy and I firmly believer of outreach. So whatever direction we for any of these issues, I know like Pin Windows, we have an outreach coming up to implement. So any outreach sections on that for any changes we're always going to advocate and push out information. But I think section 25 is referenced some earlier sections. So depending on what the extent of that was, just making sure what that timeline looks like to implement outreach and so forth.
Well, it sounds like you do a lot of this already, so it would be a good way to get the word out.
Okay. Anything else you wanted to comment on?
Tinted windows, we're okay with if you want to do the 70%. I think that just helps us clear up what we were trying to understand. So I don't foresee an issue on that area. And then we had sent a document reference to purchase and use with some areas that we were instead of doing summer site committee, just some areas that we could push out and let Mars know. One would be subtracting the $50 for if someone pays for an appraisal, doing a subtraction from up to $50 on from the taxable cost of the vehicle. Additionally, a couple weeks ago, we discovered DEC has a emissions program to help low-income Vermonters to get their emission systems fixed. So we've been in touch with DEC and learning about that program. And I think that might be an area I certainly never heard about it, either in the C or from other times. So I think amplifying that out to Vermonters, and we have currently put the list of dealers that are certified through DMV on our website. We're working on, I would admit, our website's like a normal state website, a little dated. We're trying to streamline that section for registration, having the dealers list, dealer appraisal, more front and centered and accessible. And the center where you had mentioned with the calculator costs, not using just the VIN, and getting that built in. And then obviously our DMV enforcement one's here right now, coming in to talk about some of the areas where there are both trouble with people trying to take advantage of even the current way purchase and use is handled, and but ways that we can also improve, because it has that nexus, whether or not we try to keep it separate or not, it has a nexus with the inspection system, and they're the ones who are intimately involved in ways that we can maybe find some efficiencies or make some changes there.
Go ahead.
So when you pay the purchase and use, you don't have to do it in person, right? Like you can just send that all in. seems like I've always done it in person, but you can just send that in mail, right? And so if they send it in and it's not the right value for the blue book, you send it back a form, or you said, this is the what you would owe. Is there a way to have on that form saying, here's the appeal process? Because I think that's the problem. Like, they don't know what to do when they get the form back, or they go in there and they're told, you can't pay that, you gotta pay this. They won't know to go to the website to look about the appeal. So I wondered if that moment that they're told that they have the wrong amount, can they say, well, here's either written, if it's a form sent to them, or verbally, if they're at the counter, say, here's the appeal process that you have available to you.
Absolutely. I think that's actually a great idea.
Okay, so I think that would be what I'd like to see, and I think that would, so if they do have some weird case, or just a case that where it is lower than the blue book, they would know right away.
Yep.
Oh, there is an appeal process. So I think they find out later, they've already paid the extra, whatever, $2,000. And then they find out a year later, oh, I didn't know there was a way to appeal.
Correct. No, that's a great idea. And that's something I think we could quickly implement in our mailings.
But if you're, at a DMV office and you bring this information and you go, wow, that's a difference than what I paid, a DMV professional would then say, oh, yeah, if that's the case, there is a way to appeal that. They normally do give that information if someone is surprised, I assume. Like, that's.
It happened to me once, but it was only a difference of like $100. Or it was a low number, so I didn't care. But they didn't say, oh, so you could have paid.
Yeah, they usually don't do that.
Oh, usually don't do that. Oh, because that's.
I just want to make sure that they were told that they should.
And that is something also, I think, with the change on the form is also just retraining as well.
Great. Administrative legwork to get things good for Vermont. Love it.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll be back in touch. I think we're about at lunch.
You want to ask about the license plates? Can we ask a question?
Go ahead. I will warn you, the license plates are fairly controversial in this committee. We've had a lot of people that want to testify, law enforcement and everything. And from my point of view, we're probably, I'm going to recommend to the committee that we take the license plates out and deal with them in the greater context of the T-bill. There's no need for individual bills that pass the legislature to balance a budget. We quite frequently pass bills that cost money, and at the end, there's a true-up process where appropriations and the money committees have to make everything balance. So we will probably deal with the issue in the greater issue, but there's way too many people to testify for us to make crossover. But I'd love to hear from you of what your thinking is.
Absolutely. I know as someone that comes from law enforcement, I still have my certification. I know that's always been, and I've had many passionate discussions with my colleagues on that side. It's since I read, I can spend $35 and put a Vermont Strong license plate on the front of my vehicle. I guess if we keep saying it's advocating for safety, I'm not sure why if it's such a safety aspect. We ran numbers. I think it's approximately 323 tickets were written for front license plate. I can get you the exact number in a second last year. I just, as someone who patrolled Moyle County and towards the end there when I was on the road, front license plate doesn't, a lot of trucks, young people, they have, a Caterpillar license plate or something cool on the front. I don't think I've ever, I don't say never, but a front license plate was never a determining factor for a stop for me. So I guess it's, and someone who had a learning disability, I can never even remember the front of the plate and try to connect it to with the back in a quick second. So other than being a green license plate, that, there you had it. So I know some of my good friends in law enforcement, some are passionate about it, some are in the opinion that it really has no bearing, because currently right now, I could put a Vermont strong or Vermont tough, or really since Irene license plate, and that's not really building inequality across Vermonters, because if I don't want to hide my front license plate, I could theoretically purchase from Save Vermont a $35 license plate, and now it's covered, or yeah, it's supposed to be covered, but plate. So the argument on that it's for safety, I kindly disagree with that notion.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I think my question is more to whether or not it's a good idea or a bad idea to have a front license plate, putting that aside. But what I understood from our council, or maybe it was Jay, maybe it was Logan who mentioned this, you can just do this without us. Like, you can decide to go to one license plate without our sign off.
That, yes, I think depends how you view that. Yeah, I think it was something that would be a change right now that I would be positive. I'd be sitting here in January answering this committee about front license plates if I didn't loop in this conversation.
But you legally could do that now, is your understanding, and you are not planning to.
Correct. Right now, I would like to have it in my currency right now with the work of the legislature.
Okay, I appreciate that. That's really helpful for me to hear. And especially if you're back in January with a different story, and I can go back and cut to the record, but I do not agree with us moving. That's my perspective, moving to one, if we're not going to also reduce the cost of registration. So if you do choose a different policy choice as a DMV, I would hope that you would go through the legislative process. And I'm really grateful to hear that that is your plan.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And we are going to